There is no point in searching the declassified KGB archives or closed party protocols for a folder marked Top Secret and titled Operation Successor. It simply does not exist. The common belief that Leonid Ilyich systematically and methodically prepared to hand over the nuclear briefcase and the Kremlin chair to his immediate relatives is one of the most persistent but undocumented myths of the stagnation era. In the Soviet Union, there was no legitimate mechanism for transferring power by right of blood, as is the case in monarchies or some authoritarian regimes today. Imagine a typical Moscow kitchen in 1980. Outside the window is a grey autumn day. On the table is tea in cups and, perhaps, a scarce stick of salami obtained through acquaintances. The intelligentsia, lowering their voices, discuss the latest news. "Did you see? They showed the son next to his father on the podium again. They're definitely preparing him," whispers one of the guests, stirring sugar into his tea. "Come on," objects another. "The Politburo will devour him. They're wolves in there, not nannies." These kitchen conversations gave rise to the legend. People saw the outward signs, awards, rapid promotions, familiar names flashing in the Pravda newspaper. But behind the facade lay the harsh mechanics of the party. The highest position in the country was determined in the course of a complex, often invisible to the world, power struggle within the Politburo of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. It was a system of checks and balances where party elders, Mikhail Suslov, Andrei Gromyko, Dmitry Ustinov, kept a close watch to ensure that no single faction gained excessive power. The idea of a dynasty contradicted the very essence of Soviet party ethics at the time. Power was considered collective. The General Secretary was only first among equals, a moderator of the interests of powerful clans, the defense industry, agrarians, security forces, and ideologues. Leonid Ilyitch's attempt to directly appoint his son or son-in-law as his successor would have been regarded by the Kremlin elders as a gross violation of the party charter and, worse still, as a threat to their own stability. They remembered Khrushchev's voluntarism and were terrified of a repeat of autocratic rule. In the corridors of the old square, people whispered about something else. The party elite understood perfectly well that Brezhnev was weakening, and the question of the transition of power was indeed acute, but it was not decided in the family circle over tea at the dacha in Zavidovo, but in offices with carpeted corridors and government telephones. The very concept of a successor project is more of a journalistic label that was applied to the era after the fact, in an attempt to explain the luxury and permissiveness surrounding the General Secretary's family, which was inexplicable to the average person. The career paths of Brezhnev's children did raise questions, but they were evidence of nepotism and their father's desire to provide his children with a comfortable life, rather than the construction of a political monarchy. Yuri Brezhnev often remained in the shadow of his more scandalous and flamboyant sister Galina, but it is his career that serves as the best proof of the absence of any real plans for succession to the throne. Yuri was a man of the system, but not its architect. His path to the top looked as smooth as freshly laid asphalt on a government highway, but this path did not lead to the helm of the state ship, but to a quiet and well-fed harbor. Yuri was born in 1933 in the city of Kamensk. His biography did not include any heroic breakthroughs or work on the ground that tempered the old-school party fighters. He graduated from the Dnipropetrovsk Metallurgical Institute, then the All-Union Academy of Foreign Trade. This choice was dictated by a desire for comfort, not power. Foreign trade in the USSR was a special caste. It meant foreign business trips, access to currency, imported technology, high-quality clothing, and the opportunity to live a life that was inaccessible to 99% of Soviet citizens. In 1980, Yuri Brezhnev became first Deputy Minister of Foreign Trade of the USSR. It sounds impressive. He was responsible for multi-million-dollar contracts, raw material supplies, and equipment purchases. He had an office in the famous high-rise building on Smolenskaya Sennaya Square, a personal Volga car, and a special ration card. Yuri Leonidovich, a gentle man who, according to his colleagues' recollections, was not without charm, signed another order for the supply of pipes or grain. He does not look like a man who lies awake at night thinking about geopolitics or ideological confrontation with the West. He is more interested in quality of life. He loved beautiful things, collected porcelain dogs, and made no secret of his penchant for good food. This is where the key detail lies. The position of First Deputy Minister is that of an economist, an administrator, but by no means a political leader. In order to claim the role of General Secretary, one had to go through a completely different school. Lead a regional committee, know the work of the Central Committee Secretariat, oversee ideology or security forces, and, most importantly, one had to be a member of the Politburo. Yuri Brezhnev was never a member of the Politburo and was not even a candidate for membership. He had been a member of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union since 1981, but this was a status position to which he had been appointed out of respect for his father. In the eyes of such heavyweights as Yuri Andropov and Konstantin Chernenko, the son of the General Secretary remained Yura, a pleasant but politically insignificant figure. He did not have his own team, nor did he have any apparatus weight. His influence was limited to the ability to call his father and ask him to help out one of his friends. It is interesting to note how the system reacted to Yuri. People were afraid to offend him, they fawned over him, and his requests were fulfilled instantly. Yuri Leonidovich called and asked for funds to be allocated to the region, the assistant reported to the minister. "Do it," the minister frowned, realizing that he could not refuse, but there was no respect in this order. It was fear of the surname, not of the person. Leonid Ilyich, being an experienced politician, understood perfectly well the limits of his son's capabilities. He saw his weaknesses, knew about his alcohol problems, which had only worsened over the years, and about his complete lack of the strong will necessary to rule an empire. His father wanted security and prosperity for his son, but he hardly saw him as a new Stalin, or even a new version of himself. His father's protection played a cruel joke on Yuri. It raised him to a height where the air was too thin for his lungs. He found himself in the golden cage of a position that was too big for him. While his father was alive, this structure held together. But any experienced apparatchik in 1982 understood that as soon as the one was gone, Yuri Leonidovich's career would end that very day. He was a decorative element of the era, its living symbol, but by no means its driving force. Think about these facts the next time you hear about dynasties in the USSR. Look closely at old photographs from that time, at the faces of those standing in the second and third rows behind Brezhnev, and try to see not only family resemblances, but also the mark of doom that lies on those who received everything not through merit, but through inheritance. Yuri Brezhnev's fate was predetermined not only by his personal qualities, but also by the very structure of Soviet power, in which he occupied the niche of honorary son. The system gave him everything except the most important thing, real power. But while Yuri was a rather passive figure, another, far more ambitious and active contender for the role of regent or even heir was growing up in the shadow of the general secretary, his brother-in-law, Yuri Mikhailovich Churbanov. And his story is no longer a quiet drama in the nomenclature's living room, but a real political thriller with chases, diamonds, and the all-powerful KGB as the main antagonist. Unlike his brother-in-law, Churbanov was not born with a silver spoon in his mouth. He was a product of the system, a career police officer who had worked his way up from the bottom. But his life changed dramatically in 1971 when, at the age of 44, the deputy head of the political department of the internal troops of the Ministry of Internal Affairs married the daughter of the General Secretary, Galina. This marriage became the most powerful career boost he could have imagined. Titles and positions rained down on him like manna from heaven. In just a few years, he made a career that would have taken others decades to achieve. Colonel, Major General, Lieutenant General, and finally, in 1981, Colonel General. The pinnacle of his career was the post of First Deputy Minister of Internal Affairs of the USSR. Let's imagine for a moment the scale of this figure. The First Deputy Minister of Internal Affairs controls a huge power structure, millions of employees, from local police officers to special forces. This means access to operational information, levers of pressure, and the ability to influence investigations across the country. Churbanov, an energetic and authoritative man, thoroughly enjoyed this position. He loved his dazzling white general's jacket, loved it when people stood to attention in front of him, loved the feeling of belonging to the highest caste. He actively tried to create his own clan within the Ministry of Internal Affairs, promoting people loyal to him to key positions. Unlike Yuri Brezhnev, he was building his own, albeit secondary, power base. This is what made him dangerous in the eyes of other members of the Politburo, especially one, KGB chairman Yuri Vladimirovich Andropov. There had always been a quiet rivalry between the two agencies, the KGB and the Ministry of Internal Affairs, competing for influence and resources. But in the late 1970s, this struggle took on a personal character. Andropov, who was aiming to succeed Brezhnev, saw Churbanov and his patron, Interior Minister Nikolai Shchelakov, a close friend of Brezhnev, as a direct threat to his ambitions. Shchelakov and Churbanov tried to turn the Ministry of Internal Affairs into a counterweight to the all-powerful KGB, and Andropov could not allow this. And here comes the most destructive factor for the dynasty, Galina Brezhneva. Her turbulent, eccentric life, which did not fit into the puritanical framework of party morality, became the Achilles heel that the State Security Committee methodically and ruthlessly exploited. Analysts from Lubyanka meticulously compiled folders of compromising material. Every affair she had, every drunken escapade, every dubious deal was recorded and placed on Andropov's desk. Her connection with the world of bohemianism and outright crime proved particularly destructive. Galina adored the circus, artists, and jewelry. She was close friends with Boris Buryatsa, a gypsy singer and speculator nicknamed Boris Diamond. Through him, and other similar characters, the General Secretary's daughter became involved in the so-called Diamond Affair, a large-scale jewelry smuggling ring. When, in 1982, shortly before Brezhnev's death, several figures involved in the case, including Buryatsa, were arrested, the threads led to the very top. Galina Brezhneva's name appeared in the investigation materials. For Andropov, it was a gift from fate. He could not strike directly at the General Secretary, but he could discredit his family by showing the other members of the Politburo the extent to which the Dnipropetrovsk clan had degenerated. Imagine a closed meeting of the Politburo. Andropov, with his ascetic and impenetrable face, places a thin folder on the table. "Comrades," he says in his quiet but authoritative voice, "we have operational information about the involvement of close relatives of high-ranking officials in speculative operations with currency valuables. This is causing enormous damage to the prestige of the party and Soviet power." He does not name names, but everyone understands. This was a blow not only to Churbanov, whose wife was at the center of the scandal, but also to Leonid Ilyich himself, who could no longer control either his daughter or the situation in the country. Moreover, the very structure of power built by Brezhnev worked against his family. His famous slogan of personnel stability led to the same people occupying all key positions for decades. It was a gerontocracy, the rule of old men. These people, who owed everything to Brezhnev, nevertheless had no intention of giving up their seats to his young and inexperienced relatives. They wanted to preserve the system that guaranteed them lifelong power. The transfer of power by inheritance would have broken this system. It would have set a dangerous precedent. Therefore, they would rather agree to one of their own, as old and predictable as themselves, than to the ambitious son-in-law or apolitical son of their patron. The grey cardinal of the Politburo, the party's chief ideologist Mikhail Andreevich Suslov, also played a huge role. A dogmatic, ascetic, and orthodox man, he was the guardian of ideological purity. For him, the provocative wealth, nepotism, and moral decay associated with the Brezhnev family were mortal sins. Suslov would never have supported a candidate who was dogged by diamond scandals and rumors of corruption. His death in January 1982 upset the balance of power in the Politburo and gave Andropov, who took the vacant second place in the party hierarchy, free rein. It was the final nail in the coffin of dynastic ambitions. In his final years, Leonid Ilyich was no longer the energetic politician who had ousted Khrushchev. Seriously ill and dependent on sleeping pills, he often lost his train of thought and struggled to perform even ceremonial functions. He was a living symbol, a banner held aloft by his entourage. He could provide his relatives with dachas, cars, and high salaries, but he was no longer able to carry out the complex political maneuvering required to transfer power. His entourage, the very same Dnipropetrovsk clan, consisting of fellow countrymen and old comrades in arms, was loyal to him personally, but not to his family. After his death, that loyalty evaporated. Everyone began to think about their own survival in the new political reality. And this reality came instantly. On the 10th of November 1982, Leonid Ilyich Brezhnev died. Just 2 days later, the plenum of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union elected Yuri Andropov as the new General Secretary. The system worked like clockwork. No one even mentioned the candidacies of Yuri Brezhnev or Yuri Churbanov. They simply did not exist in the political arena. Dark days began for the family. Yuri Brezhnev was quietly dismissed and sent into retirement. But for Churbanov, it was only the beginning. Andropov, having come to power, launched his famous campaign to restore order, which was, in fact, a purge of Brezhnev's cadres. The main target was the Ministry of Internal Affairs and its corrupt leadership. Former Minister Chernenko, stripped of all his awards, shot himself before he could be arrested. Churbanov himself was removed from his post as first deputy and sent into honorable exile as deputy head of the internal troops. But this was only a delay. After Andropov's death and Chernenko's short reign, with the arrival of Gorbachev, the wheel of repression spun with renewed force. In 1987, Yuri Churbanov was arrested on charges of bribery in the high-profile Cotton case. The trial of Brezhnev's son-in-law became a show trial, symbolizing the end of an era. He was sentenced to 12 years in prison. Thus ended the inglorious story of the failed Soviet dynasty. It failed not because someone made one specific decision. It was doomed by the very logic of the Soviet system. This system, built on the collective leadership of the party oligarchy, instinctively rejected any attempt to establish sole, let alone hereditary power. It did not tolerate outsiders and upstarts. It required decades of bureaucratic struggle, intrigue, ideological consistency, and support from key power groups. Neither Brezhnev's son nor his son-in-law possessed any of these qualities. They were merely shadows of their powerful relative, and when the sun of his power set, those shadows simply disappeared. To understand more deeply why this house of cards collapsed, it is worth taking a closer look at its foundation, the very Dnipropetrovsk clan. It was not a monolithic group of people blindly loyal to their leader and ready to pass on this loyalty to their heirs. It was a complex conglomerate of old friends, comrades in arms, and officials indebted to Brezhnev, each of whom had their own ambitions. Key figures in this clan, such as Nikolai Tikhonov, chairman of the Council of Ministers of the USSR, and Vladimir Shcherbitsky, first secretary of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of Ukraine, saw themselves as pillars of the system, not as stepping stones for the career advancement of the General Secretary's son-in-law. Shcherbitsky, for example, was the most influential leader of the largest Soviet republic and a member of the Politburo with enormous administrative weight. He himself was a potential successor, a representative of a new, younger generation of the Brezhnev elite. The idea that he would have to obey Churbanov, a former police political officer, was not only offensive to him, it was absurd. The loyalty of these people was strictly personal. They were loyal to Leonid Ilyich, the man who had raised them and to whom they owed everything. But this loyalty did not extend to his family, whom many of them secretly despised for their pretentiousness and lack of real merit. They were prepared to support the aging Brezhnev on the throne until the very end, because it guaranteed their own position. But after him, it was every man for himself. The psychological background is also interesting. Yuri Churbanov, having joined the family, tried his best to live up to his new status. There is a well-known story about his wedding to Galina. Initially, he planned a modest celebration with his colleagues. But Minister Shchelikov summoned him and said bluntly, "What are you doing, Yura? You are now a member of the family. Everything will be at the highest level." The wedding was moved to a state dacha. The tables were laden with delicacies, and the guests included members of the government. This episode is a metaphor for his entire future life. The system itself pushed him into the role of prince consort, but never recognized him as an equal. For the old guard, he remained Yurochka, the son-in-law, the upstart who had simply gotten lucky. He wore a general's uniform, but had neither frontline experience nor decades of behind-the-scenes party struggle behind him. He was a stranger in their world. The role of the General Secretary's wife, Victoria Petrovna, should not be overlooked. Unlike many wives of world leaders, she was a completely apolitical figure. Her world was limited to her home, her grandchildren, and caring for her husband's health. She did not create circles of influence around herself, did not participate in personnel intrigues, and did not try to promote her protégés. She was a classic Soviet housewife who, by a twist of fate, found herself in the Kremlin. The absence of a strong First Lady who could cement the family clan and lobby for its interests also played a role. The Brezhnev family was powerful in terms of consumption of goods, but absolutely weak as a political entity. Moreover, Leonid Ilyich had a brother, Yakov Ilyich, whose fate also cast a shadow on the family's reputation. Yakov had neither the talents nor the ambitions of his older brother, worked in modest positions in the metallurgical industry, and had serious alcohol problems. His name periodically surfaced in connection with minor domestic scandals, which had to be hushed up on instructions from Moscow. The presence of such a relative further emphasized to the party leadership that the Brezhnev breed was not a source of statesmen. A key factor that is often overlooked was the position of the army. Defense Minister Dmitry Fyodorovich Ustinov was one of the most powerful people in the country. A marshal of the Soviet Union, he controlled the giant military-industrial complex. The army elite, with its cult of professionalism, combat experience, and strict hierarchy, looked with undisguised contempt on the parquet generals from the Ministry of Internal Affairs. For combat marshals and generals who had fought in the Great Patriotic War or commanded districts and fleets, Yuri Churbanov was simply an upstart in a nice uniform. The idea that this man could one day become Supreme Commander-in-Chief was sacrilegious to them. Ustinov, being a pragmatist, would never have supported a candidate who would have been met with deafening rejection throughout the army. He was one of those who, after Brezhnev's death, immediately and without hesitation supported Andropov, a man from the understandable and respected power structure, the KGB. Finally, the social background cannot be ignored. The era of stagnation was a time of double standards. From the podium, they spoke of communist modesty, while in special distribution centers, the elite received black caviar and French cognac. Newspapers wrote about labor exploits, while people in queues told each other jokes about the decrepit General Secretary. In this atmosphere of widespread cynicism, the provocatively luxurious lifestyle of the Brezhnev family, especially his daughter, was a powerful irritant. Stories about Galina's diamonds, her exotic lovers, and drunken binges were passed from mouth to mouth, becoming embellished with incredible details. They became a symbol of the decay of power. Imagine an ordinary engineer or doctor who has been waiting in line for years for an apartment or a Zhiguli car. For him, the news that Brezhnev's son-in-law had received another star on his epaulets was not just a fact from someone else's biography, it was confirmation of the profound injustice of the system. The authorities were losing their sacred status, turning in the eyes of the people into a feeding trough for their own. Any attempt to officially cement this nepotism by passing on power by inheritance could have caused a social explosion. And in the Politburo, where people who remembered the Novocherkassk massacre of 1962 sat, they were terrified of this. They understood that the stability of the regime was based on an unspoken social contract. We give you minimal social security, you give us complete political loyalty. The appointment of Churbanov or Yuri Brezhnev as successor would have violated this contract in the most gross manner. The mechanism for bringing down the clan was set in motion long before Brezhnev's death, and its chief architect was Andropov. His KGB worked like a giant vacuum cleaner, sucking up any compromising information. But this was not simply a matter of accumulating dirt. It was a subtle operational game. Information was dispensed in doses and fed to the right people at the right moment. For example, data on corruption in the Ministry of Internal Affairs under Shelekov's leadership regularly landed on Suslov's desk, who, as the guardian of party morality, flew into a rage. Information about the machinations in which Churbanov was involved through his subordinates was brought to the attention of the members of the Politburo responsible for law enforcement agencies. Andropov did not fight openly. He created an atmosphere of toxicity around the Brezhnev family, making any bet on them politically suicidal for other players. The final chord was the famous Uzbek affair, or Cotton affair. It was a gigantic system of embezzlement and theft in the cotton industry of Uzbekistan, involving thousands of officials, including the republic's top leadership. The investigation, launched under Andropov, revealed the monstrous scale of corruption. And it was in the materials of this case that Churbanov's name surfaced. It was proven that, as first Deputy Minister of the Interior, he had received bribes from Uzbek leaders for protection and turning a blind eye to their crimes. According to the court documents, one of the bribes was presented to him in the form of a case filled with money amounting to several 100,000 rubles. For Soviet times, this was an astronomical sum. Churbanov's trial was not just a criminal proceeding, it was a political ritual designed to publicly bury the entire Brezhnev era. He was stripped of all his titles and awards, including the orders he had received as the General Secretary's son-in-law. The system that had elevated him destroyed him with equal enthusiasm, demonstrating to society and the party elite that the days of nepotism and permissiveness were over. It was a clear signal. The rules of the game had changed. Thus, the collapse of the Dynasty project was predetermined. It was unviable in the context of Soviet political culture, where personal loyalty to the leader did not translate into loyalty to his family. It was impossible because of the ambitions of other members of the ruling elite, who were unwilling to give way to upstarts. It was doomed because of the personal qualities of the heirs themselves, who possessed neither will nor authority. And finally, it was swept away by a powerful wave of bureaucratic struggle led by a man who knew all the secret levers and vices of the system better than anyone else, Yuri Andropov. The history of the Brezhnev family has become a textbook example of how, in an authoritarian system, personal power that is not based on legitimate institutions and public support is ephemeral and short-lived. It disappears along with its bearer, leaving behind only a trail of anecdotes, scandals, and dashed hopes. It is worth digging deeper into the very nature of the Dnipropetrovsk clan to understand its internal fragility. It was not the Sicilian mafia, bound by blood oaths and omerta. It was more like a club of interests, where the main interest was maintaining the status quo. These people's power was based on the so-called telephone law, a single call from the right person who could resolve any issue, from allocating an apartment out of turn to terminating an inconvenient criminal case. And the country's main telephonist was, of course, Brezhnev himself. This system worked flawlessly when it came to economic issues, but it failed when it came to strategic succession. It was one thing to call the minister and ask for your son-in-law, but quite another to get the all-powerful Politburo to vote for him as the new leader. These were different weight categories. Members of the clan gladly enjoyed the benefits of being close to the General Secretary, but no one was willing to die for his family on the political battlefield. Their loyalty was a form of gratitude, not a feudal oath. The key figure who turned a potential dynasty into a farce was, without a doubt, Galina Leonidovna herself. Her biography is the tragedy of a Kremlin princess who was allowed everything except one thing: to be herself, away from the prying eyes of the party and the KGB. Her rebellion was not political, but existential. She was suffocating in a gilded cage. Her first high-profile scandal happened long before Churbanov, back in the Khrushchev era. In 1962, already a 33-year-old woman, she ran away with 18-year-old illusionist Igor Kio and secretly married him. Brezhnev, then chairman of the Presidium of the Supreme Soviet, was furious. He mobilized the entire state apparatus to annul the marriage. KGB agents tracked down the newlyweds in Sochi, took Kio's passport, tore out the page with the registration mark, and returned Galina to Moscow. The marriage lasted only 9 days. This episode is indicative. Galina was not looking for power, but for strong emotions, a bohemian life, freedom from protocol. And each of her impulses was a blow to the reputation of her father and the entire family. She was living compromising material, a walking problem that Churbanov, by marrying her, took upon himself, naively believing that this was the price for a ticket to the top. In reality, it was a one-way ticket to Lefortovo prison. This atmosphere of permissiveness at the top had even deeper consequences for the whole country. It legitimized the so-called second economy, a gigantic shadow market that permeated the entire Soviet society. If the General Secretary's daughter could flaunt smuggled diamonds, why couldn't the director of a grocery store push to the left a box of scarce sausage? An unspoken system emerged, where everyone in their place tried to grab a piece of the state pie. And Andropov, launching his anti-corruption campaign, targeted this very system. One of the most high-profile cases was that of Yuri Sokolov, director of Moscow's Gastronome No. 1, Elisyevsky, who was shot in 1984 for embezzlement on a particularly large scale. During the investigation, it emerged that Sokolov had close ties to the top echelons of Moscow's trade and, through them, to the powerful figures of the day, including people from Galina Brezhneva's circle. Each such trial was not just a fight against theft, but a public flogging of the Brezhnev era, a demonstration that the time of impunity was over. Against this backdrop, Churbanov's candidacy, the flesh and blood of this system, seemed not only inappropriate, but downright mocking. We should not forget the role of Konstantin Ustinovich Chernenko. He is often portrayed as Andropov's weak and sick successor, but in the last years of Brezhnev's rule, he was one of the most influential people in the Kremlin. As head of the General Department of the Central Committee, he controlled all party paperwork and was Brezhnev's personal rapporteur and confidant. Chernenko was the quintessential member of the Dnipropetrovsk clan, absolutely loyal, efficient, but at the same time having his own, albeit carefully concealed, ambitions. He saw himself as the guardian of Brezhnev's legacy and his natural successor. The idea that he, an old party apparatchik, would have to give way to the General Secretary's son-in-law was unthinkable to him. Like other elders, he contributed to creating a cocoon of flattery and care around Brezhnev, shielding him from unpleasant information, including about his daughter's escapades. But this was not done to clear the way for Churbanov, but quite the opposite, to maintain stability, which would allow Chernenko himself to take the decisive step at the right moment. He was part of a system that blocked the dynastic project from within, under the guise of absolute loyalty. It is interesting to draw parallels with other countries in the socialist camp, where dynastic projects proved to be much more successful. In Romania, Nicolae Ceausescu turned his wife Elena into a world-renowned scientist and the second most powerful person in the state, while grooming his son Niku as his successor. In North Korea, Kim Il-sung successfully transferred power to his son Kim Jong-il. Even within the USSR itself, there was the unique example of Azerbaijan, where Heydar Aliyev, a member of the Politburo and Brezhnev's ally, managed to create a clan system that allowed him, and later his son Ilham, to rule the republic for decades. Why was this possible there, but failed in Moscow? The answer lies in the scale and structure of power. In Romania and Azerbaijan, power was much more personalized, relying on local clans, regional associations, and security services that were completely under the leader's control. In Moscow, however, the Politburo remained a collective body representing the interests of the giant all-union elites, the army, the military-industrial complex, the KGB, and the party apparatus of Russia, Ukraine, and Leningrad. None of these groups was interested in establishing a monarchical principle that would deprive them of their influence. Aliyev may have been the master in Baku, but in Moscow, he was just one of the players. This oligarchic nature of the Central Soviet power became an insurmountable barrier to any dynastic ambitions. Finally, it is worth looking at the next generation, the General Secretary's grandchildren. Hopes for the continuation of the line could be linked to his grandson, Andrei Yuryevich Brezhnev, son of Yuri Leonidovich. Unlike his father, he was more ambitious and interested in politics. He graduated from MGMO and worked at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. It would seem to be the ideal starting point. However, after the collapse of the USSR, his attempts to enter big politics in the new Russia looked tragicomic. In the 1990s, he tried to create the all-Russian Communist Public Movement, ran for the State Duma, and even for the post of governor of the Sverdlovsk region, but each time suffered a crushing defeat, receiving a negligible percentage of the vote. The surname that once opened all doors now worked against him, associated with an era of stagnation, marasmus, and anecdotes. This became the final verdict of history. There was no foundation for a dynasty. All the power of the Brezhnev name turned out to be tied to a single seat in the Kremlin. As soon as someone else took it, the magic disappeared, leaving behind only the burden of scandalous fame and a pile of problems for descendants, forced to carry the reflection of someone else's long-extinguished greatness for the rest of their lives. It is important to understand the personal aspect of the confrontation between the security agencies. Interior Minister Nikolai Shchelikov was not just Churbanov's boss. He was a close friend and fellow countryman of Brezhnev since the days of Dnipropetrovsk. It was Shchelikov who transformed the Ministry of Internal Affairs from a secondary agency into a powerful structure capable of competing with the KGB. Under him, the police got a new luxurious building on Zhitnaya Street. Employees got higher salaries and prestigious uniforms, and the minister himself cultivated the image of a patron of the arts. This ostentatious luxury and attempts to expand the investigative powers of the Ministry of Internal Affairs caused deep irritation at Lubyanka. Andropov and his committee perceived this as a direct threat to their monopoly on power. In this struggle, Yuri Churbanov was not an independent figure, but rather a battering ram in Shelakov's hands, a tool for strengthening the Interior Ministry's position in the highest echelons of power. Therefore, the blow to Churbanov was simultaneously a blow to his all-powerful patron and to the entire Dnipropetrovsk wing in the security forces. A significant factor that paralyzed the General Secretary's will was his physical condition, which in recent years had become a state secret. Real control over access to Brezhnev's body was exercised not so much by his family as by his personal security detail, headed by Alexander Ryabenko, and in particular by medical personnel under the leadership of academician Yevgeny Chazov. Brezhnev was heavily dependent on sleeping pills and sedatives, and his schedule and social circle was strictly regulated. According to eyewitness accounts, his nurse, Nina Korovyakova, sometimes had more influence over the General Secretary's daily routine than members of the Politburo. In this situation, Leonid Ilyich was transformed from a subject of power into an object of power, a symbol that various influential groups tried to use to their advantage. He could no longer be the architect of a complex operation to transfer power. He was more like a banner that those around him tried to hold on to for as long as possible, knowing that with his fall, their own well-being would also collapse. Against this backdrop, the anti-corruption investigations initiated by the KGB looked particularly striking. The case of the Sochi Krasnodar Mafia, led by Sergei Medunov, first secretary of the regional committee, who turned the region entrusted to him into his personal fiefdom with underground workshops and total corruption, was just one episode. At the same time, the Ocean case was unfolding, involving embezzlement in the fishing industry, the threads of which also stretched to the highest offices. These high-profile trials were not just a fight against crime, but a systematic effort to dismantle the Brezhnev model of governance based on personal loyalty and mutual responsibility. For ordinary citizens who stood in line for hours for sausage or waited years for a telephone to be installed, the news of gold bars and dachas with swimming pools confiscated from officials was shocking confirmation of the total decay of the elite. This created a powerful public demand for restoring order, which Andropov brilliantly exploited. Any attempt by Brezhnev in these circumstances to promote his son-in-law, whose name was already associated with luxury and abuse of power, to the highest office would have been perceived not simply as nepotism, but as a slap in the face to the entire country. The system was ripe for change, and Churbanov's candidacy was a completely unviable prospect. The so-called successor project within the Brezhnev family failed not because of a single decision, but due to a whole complex of reasons. The absence of a legal mechanism for the transfer of power by kinship in the USSR, resistance from the party oligarchy, the moral and professional incompetence of the potential heirs themselves, as well as the general crisis of the political model of the late stagnation, all this made the creation of a political dynasty impossible. The history of the Brezhnev family is a vivid illustration of the fact that even in an authoritarian system, personal power does not always translate into family power. Despite all its deformations, the Soviet system nevertheless retained collective mechanisms for leadership change,